wanted to touch on a few housekeeping items, things that oftentimes get brought up. Number one, we are recording this. And so if you're joining us via Zoom, you will actually receive a link to watch the recorded version in probably a day or two. And we'll send that to you via email. If you're joining us on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, then once the presentation is done, you can just rewatch it right there. So that's pretty convenient as well. And one other thing that I always want to make sure everyone knows is John graciously will be answering your questions today. And he loves questions. He loves to kind of help out the community wherever he can. So make sure that if you have a question that comes to mind, you drop it in the chat wherever you're watching this sooner than later, because I also am willing to bet that we will get a lot of questions. So getting yours sent in as quickly as possible is probably in your best interest. And with that, I think that takes care of the housekeeping. If you're joining us on Zoom and you run into any issues, feel free to send us a chat or a Q&A question, I guess, and we'll help out. And with that, John, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Looks like we've got people still coming in, which is always a good sign. I think we have plenty of room inside this building, don't we?
We do, yeah, quite a bit.
All right, so I am going to share my screen here. And it's asking me a lot of questions, and there it goes. Screen sharing okay?
Looks great.
Perfect. So again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And with the aptly name, and I'm not going to take credit for this cool name of the webinar, I think Daniel and our other friends here named it, We Will Rock Vue. But that's about as good as the jokes get all day today. So we're going to talk about learning Vue.js fundamentals and why it excites me, and hopefully it excites you. And if not, maybe it will by the end of today. So the idea here is I'm going to talk about different parts of Vue and share with you what I feel like is some of the most key fundamental aspects of Vue that you need to know. Not everything about Vue. We've got plenty of courses at Pluralsight that do that, but this is more about what are the pieces you really need to know to build quality applications on the web. My name is John Papa, and if you want to reach out to me afterwards, you can find me here at Pluralsight or also at Twitter at @John_Papa. So first of all, one of the reasons I really like Vue is it's an approachable web framework. And they put this right on the front page of their website. And now what does approachable mean? Everybody talks about what's easiest to use or most powerful or most fast. But with approachable, what I like is we all have to live with the code that we write for a long time. And sometimes we have to live with other people's code. And I feel like Vue makes things in a way that people can approach this framework without knowing much about it and jump right in and be productive quickly. So what's easy to one person may not be easy to another, but what's approachable is kind of more about what makes it easier for somebody new to it to come into it. So this is an approachable framework, and a couple things about my presentations. First, I like to share the links twice. I not only put these up at the end, which I will, but I also have a bunch of links here at the front, that's things that you'll be seeing today. The Vue docs are amazing. You definitely want to check these out. Also, the VS Code extension or VS Code tool is what I'm going to be using today. And you can find a link to that right here. The development tools for Vue are very nice to use. There's some extensions for Vue that you can use in VS Code. I'll show you what those are. They're absolutely incredible. And then we've got a GitHub repo, which we'll be showing at the end. It's called heroes-vue. You can find all the code that I'm going to show you today right inside that link. And then there's a getting started course that I wrote on a company called Pluralsight, which you're probably very familiar with. And then also a free Azure trial if you want to host Vue up in the cloud. So you'll see these links at the end again, but I wanted to give you a chance to see them now too. And the whole idea behind Vue is it's simple, it's powerful, and it's quite popular. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole discussion about which framework is better or worse, or which one should you use, etc. But I want to talk about the popularity for a minute, because people often try to cite Stack Overflow surveys, or the state of JavaScript surveys, or NPM downloads, or GitHub stars to say which framework should I be using out there because this one has more or this one has far more or far less, etc. All those stats are just a simple perspective into which ones are more popular. But I can tell you this, Vue is immensely popular around the world, and none of these single polls or surveys or stats you see out there will really reflect how popular Vue, React, and Angular are as a whole. If you've chosen one of those three web frameworks, congratulations, you've made a good choice. So how do you get started with it? Let's talk about that approachability. First of all, you can literally be running in minutes with Vue. And if you spend just a week with Vue, you'll learn a whole ton about it. When I first learned Vue a couple of years ago, I spent 4 hours on a Sunday on their docs website, and I had an application, a decent application up and running. The syntax wasn't that difficult. The concepts were explained very clearly in the docs. It was really, really nice. Now, did I know everything after 4 hours? No, absolutely not. But I was able to kind of get the idea of how it worked. And that's what I want to do to you today in less than 4 hours. We'll do this in about 45 minutes. So how do you make progress quickly? First, we have got this thing called a script tag on the web. You don't need to have fancy tooling or anything else to make this work. One of the cool things about Vue is you can literally just drop a script tag in any HTML page, set some kind of a data value, and you can rock and roll. So over here on the right, you can see we have a script tag pointing to a CDN, which hosts the Vue framework. And then inside the body of my HTML, we can see that we've got this interesting syntax here. We've got hello name inside of curly braces. We'll learn more about that in a minute, but just know for now that that's going to display hello John or hello Daniel. And then down below in the script, we can see we're creating a new instance of Vue. We're setting the element to app. That basically tells it where is Vue located on this page. It's inside the div called app. And then our data, which is just our data model, it's going to contain an object that has a property called name, and by default, it's got John. So this much code very simply can set up a Vue application, nothing else to install, no NPM, no node, no nothing else. This is how easy it is to get started with a very basic Vue application, which makes it really nice for adding it into a PHP app or an ASP.NET app or a Java app or something else too, so you can mix and match. Now, I'm going to recommend that you don't start that way when you build most of your apps. And the reason for that is it can be difficult to start new apps. Starting from a blank slate and not knowing what the features are, how do you organize the folder structure and the files? What's the style guide? Like how should you name things and how should you create your components? How do you make sure that the building of the JavaScript files is optimized? How do you customize with theme conventions? So many things that you have to think about. The nice thing is there is a tool called the Vue CLI, command line interface. And the Vue CLI will do what you see here on the screen. You can install it and get up and running and do a build, and it kind of sets you up for success. So out of the box, you get all these features. You get Webpack, which builds your code for you. You get things like Jest, so you can do testing. You can choose Babel or TypeScript if you want. It's got things like Cypress.io, so you can do end-to-end testing. You can use Sass or Less or plain CSS. It's got a bunch of things right out of the box. And it's really nice because you can choose what you want to do. So why should you use the Vue CLI? Basically because it makes it really easy to create an application right out of the box that follows the style guide. So what do you need to get started with Vue if you want to do more than just drop a script tag on the page? First, we say you require to use Node. So if you go to the Node.js org page, and then you download the latest version of Node, the LTS version. That stands for the long-term support. And then you install Vue CLI with this command, npm install, -g means globally, and then you say @vue/CLI. And I recommend that you get the LTS version of Node, whatever it happens to be at the time. And I'll show you how to go there real quick. We'll jump over to the browser. We'll click on the Node org. And notice, as I zoom in, when I come here, there's two versions of Node shown. There's 12 and 14. Now, normally you might say, hey, 14 sounds better. Let's go there. But they separate these by LTS and current. LTS is the one that's recommended for most users. It's the most stable. It's the one that most people support. I always recommend using LTS. If you wanted to look into this more, there's a schedule that shows you when these things come out. And eventually 14 will become LTS. But that's what I mean by always look at the LTS version. And of course, you get the Vue CLI then. So once you had the Vue CLI, this is all you do to create a new Vue app. You type in Vue, create, and then the name of your app. You say hello world. And then you just cd, change directory into hello world, or point your favorite editor at it. And then to run the app, you just type npm run serve. npm run, and then there's a script inside of the app that got created that will then build and serve your application right inside your computer. And that's it. Super easy to get started. It generates a new app. It then serves it up and builds it for you. There's some other commands that you might want to know about with the CLI. I mentioned Vue create, that creates a new app. One of my favorites is Vue-help. So if you forget what the commands are, you just type Vue-help and it displays all the help on the screen. And then 3 common ones are to lint, build, or serve. Linting will fix any basic ESLint issues. Building will build the app, like when you want to go to production. That's great for your CI system. And then serves what you run locally when you're just running the app. All right, so once you've got an application, we've done our Vue create hello world. How do you actually get data showing up on the page? So data binding and events are 2 key aspects. Data binding means putting data on the page and then saving it to your browser. And then also events is how do you capture user input? Like somebody clicked a button. So we'll talk about how we display the data, how you can edit that kind of data, how you make UI changes, and then how you handle those user interactions. First, let's say we want to bind to a property inside of HTML. What does that mean? So let's say we've got an anchor, an A tag basically, and it's a hyperlink. What we could do is you could say, all right, normally we have normal href. If we put the v-bind : syntax before that href, what that means is that we're going to bind to a property inside of our Vue code called GitHub that will display whatever the GitHub URL is. So it becomes a variable. Now, type in v-bind : is a lot, so there's a shortcut syntax. We just type colon in front of href, and that makes it super easy. And we'll show this in an application too. So now we know how to bind to a property. What if we want to display just a name or some value? All you have to do is do the double curly braces. We saw this in the first example with the script tag. So here we're saying hello name. And name is not the word name, it's a variable or a model. The model is basically just a fancy thing for this is my data model. So we can say, all right, it's known as interpolation. We're going to interpolate the model called name, which might have a value like John or whatever a user types in. So then we can say, hello, John. Now, technically, we could also use this v-text syntax as well, but most of the time people just use the double curly braces as a shortcut. So where does name come from? Remember, we have a data model. And the way we get a data model is inside of our JavaScript on the page. We could have this data function, and the data function returns an object, which is basically all the data that the component needs to know about. So that's it. The data is our model, and then we render that on the page or interpolate it with curly braces. So then how do we take the events and listen to them? So we want to execute when an event occurs. That's cool. We're going to use this v-on : to do that. Now notice there's a shortcut syntax for v-on as well. So instead of v-bind, we use colon. That's for binding properties. And v-on, instead, we're going to use the @ sign. So here we're saying on the button, there's a click event for an HTML button. That's not a Vue thing. That's just in the browser. So we stick this @ sign in front of the click, and that says, okay, now listen to this click event, Vue, and then call a function called OK. Oops. So down below, we can see inside of our script tag, we've got our data for name, but we also have methods. Methods are functions. We're saying there's a function here called OK. And then we could put some code in there to do something when we click the button. So here what we're saying is when somebody clicks that button, call the function down below inside the JavaScript called OK. Now, what about two-way binding? We saw we can bind to a property, but how do we bind to like an input? Somebody can enter data in a form. So imagine we've got this model called hero, and it's got a first name property. Then the user is going to type some value into an input, and then we want it to automatically change the value of our hero.firstname property. That makes a lot of sense. So now we've got some HTML. We have an input where we have a V model. The V model is a Vue syntax, which says V dash, probably picking up there's a lot of V dashes. Those are Vue directives or properties inside of our HTML. So here we've got V dash model, which refers to our data model. And what data model should show up for that input? Hero.firstname. So it's going to look for a hero object inside of the component and then look for that first name property. So here we have two-way binding. What this means is the user will type into the hero text box and then it will automatically update what's in the model. And likewise, if we read the model out of a database and store it in the code here into hero.firstname, it'll automatically show up in the input box. So it goes both ways. Two ways means it starts at the screen or the glass for the user and ends up inside of the model. And then the second way is somebody changes the value in the code in the model and it shows up on the screen. Now, something else that's kind of cool about this, kind of a not fundamental, but I think it's nice to show, is that you can also use key modifiers here. So the key modifiers I'm showing, first of all, are, let's say I want something to happen when somebody presses the escape key. I could actually bind to the key up event, which again is not a Vue thing. It's in the DOM. So I could say key up.escape. And I put the @ sign in front of it so I know I'm bound to it. And now it's going to call a clear power function or method. So that's one way we can do a key modifier. Another option is we can actually change the CSS class associated with this element. Here, we're going to use :class. That's a shortcut for v-bind:. And I'm saying what I want you to do is if the hero's power, we're going to negate it. So if not hero power, then show the invalid class. It's actually a class called invalid in the CSS. So the invalid class would appear in the CSS if the hero power was false. And then if it was true, it would disappear. And that's really, really convenient for adding or changing CSS inside your app. Very helpful for master details. Maybe you've got a search list. You select a single row and you only want to highlight that row in a different color, like yellow background. You could use :class to do that. So here's more about class bindings. The syntax for class bindings looks like this. We've seen the idea here for :class. And then essentially you put the class name, that's invalid in this case, : and then expression comes after that. So we've seen several shortcuts so far that Vue allows us to use. We're going to see a couple more too. The nice thing is there's a lot of good shortcuts, but there's not a ton to learn. We've learned most of them already. Let's look at those real quick. If we want to do interpolation, like displaying a value from a model, we just use double curly braces. If you want to bind to an event and handle a button click, you do @event. If you want to bind to a property, you just do : then the property name. So we could have here, for example, double curly braces name. We could to bind to an event like @click, or we could bind to a property like : href. And if we want two-way binding, we actually use v-model. There's no shortcut for that one because there is no such thing as a two-way binding in the DOM. Now we've learned about the basics of binding. What about having a list? I mentioned you could have a list of data. We'll look at how you do lists and if statements. So how do you display those lists and how do you add content or make it go away when you don't need it in the DOM? We're going to render a list here. And let's say we've got a list of items in an array called item list. So what we could do is then list all of those on the page and create maybe table rows or list items in HTML, li tags. So it's going to repeat the HTML content for each one. Now, we're also going to want to stick a key onto each one of those rows. That will help make the rendering as fast as it can be, so it knows which rows have changed and which rows to leave alone when the data changes. So here we can see we've got a UL, an unordered list, and inside of that we have a list item. We're saying V-4, and that's going to iterate through all the heroes. So I have a list of heroes in an array. I'm saying, okay, each hero is going to represent one at a time every hero in the heroes array. And the heroes array is defined in my data model. And then I can iterate through those and display the hero name. So the hero name will show up. And then how do I know each row is unique? Maybe I'm not going to display the unique identifier. I don't have to. I can if I want. But what I'm going to do is say : key. So I'm binding the key value for each row, which will be unique, to the hero.id, or it could be like hero.unique identifier or hero.name, whatever happens to be unique in your particular array. You don't have to have a key, but it will speed up and avoid problems for your lists. So how do you conditionally show content? So you can give it an expression that would be true or false, and then would add or remove it from the DOM. And for this, we use a v-if. So we have a v-for or a v-if. So in this case, I have imagined a list of heroes that we did with the v-for. And when somebody selects a hero, I set a value in the model called selected hero. So when selected hero gets set, this condition for v-if will become true. Therefore, it will then display you selected hero.firstname. Now, the interesting thing about a v-if is all the HTML you see on this slide, none of it will appear unless there's a selected hero. It just goes out of the DOM completely. And you can look at this inside your browser developer tools. If there is a selected hero, this content will automatically be added to the DOM, wherever it happens to be inside your page. So it's really nice. It's a great way for you to like instantly show values, especially for master details. Because in a master detail list, you have a bunch of items. And let's say it's a list of heroes. Until you select a hero, I don't want to see the value that says you selected this hero. I don't want to see it until I've actually selected it. So here's our top tips for conditionals. Always use a v-if when you know you want to add or remove content from the DOM. You can use another directive called v-show if you want to show or hide content. The subtle difference here is a v-if will literally take that div that we had and add it or remove from the DOM. The v-show will always have the content in the DOM, but it'll use CSS to make it visible or not. So that's a subtle difference. And then there's a v-for, which lets us iterate over a list anytime we have like search results, and that's extremely common. And don't forget, when you use a v-for, the : key is really nice for identifying the unique value for the row. So Vue makes it really nice to put interactive pages together. Let me show you an example of some of the things we've learned and what you can do. I keep talking at a master detail. What a master detail is you've got a list of something. Master is, okay, here is I've got this list of items and I've got a hero. I'm going to select the hero. Once I select the hero, if I want to see the details of that hero, my detail is all the information like the hero name, the ID, the address, their superpowers, whatever it happens to be. All the information about the hero object is the detail. The master could be the list it came from or just some other parent object. We do these a lot inside of our applications. So here's a master detail example. On the left here, we've got a UL and we're displaying all of our heroes. Now notice we added a little bit more to the code. Kind of put together things we've learned here. First, every time we have this LI and we select a particular LI, it's going to call the click event. So somebody clicks on a hero and it's going to set the selected hero model to whatever hero they selected. And then we're going to highlight that hero by using the : class. And then down below, we see the v-if is going to show the selected hero. Now, imagine we've got a data model that looks like this. Here, we've got the heroes array, which is being bound to the for loop. And that shows me Ella, Madeline, and Haley. And then those 3 heroes will show up on our list. When I select one like Madeline, Madeline will become, let's say, yellow because the highlight class is there. And then the details section becomes visible because by default, the selected hero was undefined, but now the selected hero is going to be equal to Madeline. So right here, I click on that box to show me that's the Madeline record. It's going to set the selected hero, and then it's going to automatically show in the VIF the details. So we can see how we used a bunch of concepts here. We used the v-for, the VIF, we used the key, we used the @click, and we used property binding. And don't forget, we also showed interpolation with the hero name. So with that, you can imagine there's a whole bunch of things you can do. Now I've talked about this data function, but I want to show you a little bit more about it. Like, what is that data function? Vue has this thing called a reactivity system. What you really need to know is that Vue will react to your data changes. So when you have values in the data function and those values change, your component's going to react to it. It's going to update. So for example, here we have a data function, and inside that we return back an empty heroes array, an undefined selected hero, and a message that has no value. Now this is important. Even if I want those values to start off as empty or nothing in them, I still have to define those values at start, because the way Vue works is for it to react to your data model, you have to tell it what the shape of your data model looks like. So yes, when I first start up, I have no heroes. I'm going to go get them. So I set it to a heroes property here with an empty array. And then I'll use something which we'll see in a moment, which will go get the heroes. So that's the important part about data. Always define all the properties you need at design time and set them to no value if you don't have any to start. Of course, you can set them to a default value if you want to. So here we got our data model, and then we return the function, and then it reacts to all the changes. Like if I change message to hello world, then the component will update everything that's bound to message. Now you can also have computed properties. These are kind of cool. This borrows a concept which I first heard about in something called Knockout.js. So whenever any dependency, any models you have change, it'll automatically update and reevaluate a function. Very common for things like full name. Let's say you've got a hero first name and a hero last name in your data. When either one of those changes, you want to update a property called full name. So I can create this thing called a computed, and the computed defines something called full name, and full name is a function which only gets run whenever first name or last name changes. Remember, it's reacting to first name or last name. This is nice because it doesn't run all the time. It only runs when there's a change, which is what we want. So here we can create all sorts of cool computeds for like full name or address, which might contain city, state, zip, country, etc. So if we set our values to defaults when the application starts, how do we actually go get data? There's different lifecycle hooks you can tap into with Vue. And here they are. If you want to learn more about all of these, you can go check them out at the docs, which are great. But the one I want to share with you is created. Created happens when the Vue component is created, which is a great time to go fetch your data. Now, you can use that to go get the data and then fill things in. Now, the templates, which is HTML, it's not yet mounted or rendered on your page when this function runs. So when created runs, the component isn't actually visible. So you can't manipulate the HTML. But what you can do is go get the data. So when it's time to show the HTML, everything just works. So what you can do is create a created function. And in the created function, I'm calling another function that's asynchronous. In my case, saying, go get my heroes. And then once you get them, set the heroes result equal to a model called heroes. Now this in between function where it says this.heroes equals heroes, the left-hand side, the this.heroes, that means it's referring to my data model in the data function. The right-hand side is the expression variable heroes. That comes out of my asynchronous function. So this could be this.heroes equals result, for example. Now what happens if you have multiple components Multiple components get fun because that's a real app. You might have a heroes component, which has a list component, which also has a search component or a details component. And maybe a heroes list component has a custom button component and a list item. Whenever you're creating your component trees in your application, and I recommend you create small components because it's much easier to maintain. And when things break, frankly, it's easier to figure out a small component than it is a bigger one. It'll be a lot more efficient for you to create these components if you know how to make a parent component know that it has a child component. So let's talk about how you create components inside of other components. Here we've got a heroes view. And what we want to do is in the heroes view component, that's the name of our component file, we're declaring not only the name of the component as heroes and the data, which will have some kind of function in there with our model, but we also say this component called heroes has child components called list header, hero list, and hero detail. So you can refer to those other components. This is how we tell it that these components are children of the parent. It creates a dependency hierarchy or a component hierarchy, or sometimes called a component tree. So the parent is heroes and the children are list header, heroes list, and hero detail. So here's an example. Here we've got our heroes component. That's the screen. And inside of it, we're showing a hero detail. Now we're only going to show the hero detail if there's been a selected hero with our VIF. And then inside of our hero detail component, which we're showing off to the right, it probably has a value. Like when we ever have a parent component to a child component, we're probably going to pass a value from the parent to the child. So here we're defining that we have a parent called heroes and a child called hero detail. And we're going to pass what's called a prop from the heroes to the hero details. A prop is a property. So we're going to pass a property from the hero component. Somebody selected a hero. It's called selected hero in my parent. And in the child component, I need to know before I display the details of the hero, what hero it is. So I've defined a prop called hero. It's a type object, and the default value is an empty object. And what we're doing here is saying on the left, we're going to bind :hero that's in that hero detail component to the selected hero from the parent component. So this says, give me the selected hero from the parent, pass it to the child. We're passing a prop from the parent to the child. And this is how we do our binding from component to component. And notice it's just :hero. We're binding a property just like we did to the :href. Now, what if we want to pass values back up from child to parent? For example, somebody saves the hero detail. So I'm again inside of my hero's parent. I've passed my hero, select the hero down. But when I save the value inside my hero detail component, I'm going to have a function called save hero, or a method. Now I'm going to use a special function call called emit. So I say this dot $emit, that's a Vue function. This dot $emit, and the two parameters are, first, what's the name of the function? What event am I emitting? It's called save. And notice that matches with the @save on the left. That's my parent component. And then what am I passing when I save? I'm going to pass the hero object that they saved. So here we're emitting an event from the child, hero details, to the parent, heroes. And this is how we fire the event called emit. And then that matches the save right there. So those two words have to match. It's the same kind of thing as you can imagine a click event is working. We can bind to the click event for a button, but we don't have to implement how click works. It just works out of the browser. But if we bind to the save event, that doesn't exist unless we create it. So we have to create that by doing this dot $emit. And that's all there is to it. And you can optionally pass values. If there's nothing to pass, like if I canceled, maybe I don't pass anything. The second parameter on emit is optional. Oh, and then one thing, and I put this in here on purpose, the save hero on the left. Notice that I don't have to call the function in my parent the same as what's in my child. So in the child, it's called the save event. In the parent, I'm going to call a function called save hero. That will probably make an HTTP call out to a database. Speaking of HTTP, How do we actually save data from our component back to our database? So there is no HTTP baked into Vue, and that's a good thing because there's two really popular ways to do HTTP. First, if you're using modern browsers, you can use the Fetch API, and that's baked into all modern browsers. If you're using older browsers, that won't work so good. But even if you're using modern browsers, I still prefer the second method, and that's using a library called Axios. You can learn more about it at this link. Axios is a promise-based HTTP library, which lets you talk from a browser or node to make HTTP calls. I find the interface for it to be easier, and it kind of it makes it simpler to make HTTP calls than Fetch, in my opinion, especially to do more complex things that you might do in a larger application. So how do you get Axios? You install it by doing npm install Axios, just like this. And then to fetch data in your code, here's what you do. You import Axios, and then you use like a get or a post or delete, whatever you need to do. So here, I'm importing Axios at the top of my code. And then I'm going to say in a created event that we're using, that's the lifecycle event. And notice I made this async. I'm using the async keyword in JavaScript because created is now going to call an asynchronous function. The asynchronous function is Axios's get function. It's going to make a get call with HTTP to the URL of API/heroes. And because I left off the full URL, it's going to go to wherever my app is located. So it's like johnpapa.net, for example. So here I'm saying await Axios, go get API heroes. When the response comes back, it'll await that response. My response will actually be in response.data. So the response object comes back with a bunch of information like the status and stuff like that, and headers and the data. So now I'm going to say this.heroes equals my response data. Just like that. So we import Axios, and then we await the API call, which is async, and that's it. Now, if you want to do more complicated stuff, there's actually a configuration option for Axios. You don't have to just pass the URL. You can pass in things like what's the method. You can pass in a fully qualified URL. You can pass in custom headers. You can even pass in a body like data. So if you're doing like a post or a put, you can pass in data here. And you can learn more about this at this URL here. And let's see, there we go. So the last piece of this is routing. We talk about Vue as being a web framework. These things used to be called SPAs, or single page applications. What we never liked about that term was it makes it sound like you only get one page and that's it. What if you're building a big app? Well, you need more than one page. Well, what SPA meant is that you have one page served from the server, and then the rest of the pages are routed all inside the browser. So you can have lots of pages technically. So instead, we call these web frameworks, and now we need to learn about how we can route from, let's say, a heroes page to a customers page to a admin page. So to route in the client, because we don't want to make server calls, we need a Vue router. Now the Vue router does a couple of basic things for us. It helps us set up eager and lazy loading. Eager loading means that when we send the Vue application to the browser on the first time a user goes to it, everything that's eagerly loaded will automatically go to the browser, even if it's not being used, which is nice because that means that if it's going to be used really quickly, it's already there. But it's not nice if it's bringing across content that slows down how quickly the user sees that first page. If we need the content to be there, but not right away, we can use lazy loading. And we'll show you how that works. Basically, that means the content's not brought to the browser until it's actually needed. For example, let's say we go to an admin page or a login page or change your profile page. We don't actually load that with lazy loading until you actually go to that page, and the router does that for us. Now, the navigation API is nice because it helps us navigate through code with the router. We can pass parameters through the different pages. We can automatically highlight in a menu which page we're on. And it uses HTML5 history mode by default, which basically means you get all your full URLs and it shows up in the forward and back buttons inside your browser. So how do you add routing to your Vue app? So we take the router and we add it to the app. We define our routes. We tell our app about the routes, and then we can add links somewhere to actually go to the routes. Let's set this up. First, we install the router with the Vue CLI. So we already had the Vue CLI. So we call Vue add router. Vue is a Vue CLI, and we're adding the router to it. This will automatically set up our page. And this is what it does. When you call Vue CLI to add the router, it's going to add this line of code here. So it actually uses your router. And then it's going to add that line right there inside your main.js. Now, we haven't talked about main.js because it automatically gets created for you. But when you create your main.js file, that is the first thing that runs in Vue. So when your app first runs, it runs this main.js file. And now it's going to connect your router to it. And that's it. We just run Vue add router. Now that we have a router, what do you do with it? Well, you have to tell it what are your routes. And this is something that can't be set up automatically. You have to tell it these because it's your app. So first, we tell Vue to use the router. We can enable history mode here. And then we can set our default route. Most applications will want a default route. So when you go to / on your website, what do I want to do? I want to redirect that to the heroes component. When I go to /heroes, it goes to heroes. When I go to /villains, it goes to villains. And then I always like to have the last one on this list. Star means that if it's not one of those other three, go to a component called not found. So I'll actually load a page on the screen for the user saying, this page isn't found. You probably went to the wrong place. Click this button here to go back to the home page. That's just a nice thing. And that star should always be last because you want that to match if nothing else matches. These routes are matched in sequence. So then inside your main Vue component, we'll call this app Vue. What you can do is you can connect your router. So here I've got two router links. Router links are basically menus. The router link becomes an href, which then you tell it, where do I want to go? If somebody clicks this one here I've highlighted, it's going to automatically go to /heroes, which if you go to the page before, we can see /heroes goes to the hero component. So here we say, okay, go to the hero component. So the router link tells people where to go, but then the router view tells them where to put that component. So where's it going to show up? So the HTML you're looking at is the entire Vue app. It's got a menu up top in our nav. When somebody clicks on one of those menus, it then shows whatever component that link refers to in your router file. It shows it where the router view is. So think of that router-view as an X marks the spot for this is where all of my different screens are going to show up. Now I mentioned eager and lazy loading. Eager loading is the easiest to do, but lazy loading is not so hard either. Eager is when the app loads, lazy loading is on demand. Lazy loading is what I prefer and I recommend for you all. So here, imagine this is the router.js file. Up top, here's an example of eager loading. We saw this already. Here we're saying go to /heroes and it's going to load the hero component. And then lazy loading is slightly different. Here I'm saying /villains, go to a component and then it's a function. So we don't go directly to the component. Instead, we say run this function, which is going to import the component dynamically from this file. Now, Vue is going to figure out where that file is. So when you build your bundle, it knows exactly what to do. But effectively, that's going to dynamically lazy load your component for villains. So heroes is eager, villains is lazy. And then that comment there means that that's the name of the file that we loaded. Because when you load something lazily, if you look in your browser network tab, you're going to see a new file come across the wire. If you don't use this Webpack chunk name and give it a name, the name could be anything, like just a bunch of gobbledygook random characters. So by giving it the Webpack chunk name, it's going to name it villains.bundle.js. So that was the basic overview. And I want to show you an app that kind of ties this together. And then we'll come back into the links that we have to show. Now, this application is called Heroes Vue, and it's at the GitHub link, which again, I'll show you the link in just a moment. But in this application, you're going to see that what I've got is I've got a source folder, and inside the source folder is my main.js. And remember, I'm going to get out of there. Remember, in my main.js, we talked earlier about how this is automatically set up for you. What is not set up for you is the things I've commented out. So by default, the CLI will set up everything I've got here but the comments. And then when I did Vue add router, it automatically hooked up to this router. Later on, I actually added something called Vue add Vuex, which is a data state library, which we won't get into here, but I've got a course on that at Pluralsight, which you can get into. It manages caching your data and making data calls. So that's our main file, which basically connects the app. And notice it's mounting it to the hash app. Now, hash app is going to end up appearing in my index.html, which we can go find. Oops, I'm in the wrong one. Boom. We'll get out of there. And it's going to be over here. There we go. So inside of my application, here's my body. And then down on line 29, there is my div, which is called app. Line 29 is exactly where in our index.html the Vue app is going to be located. And we know that because main.js is mounting the Vue app there along with the router and the store. And then it's going to load this app. What's app? App is the conventional default first component. That's app view, and that's located right here. And there we can see we've got a nav bar, and there's our router view for our routing that we set up. Now let me jump down into a component like the heroes. So if I go into heroes, and what I'm doing, by the way, is I'm hitting F1 on my keyboard, or if you're in a Mac, you can hit Command P, and I'm typing in heroes.view, and you'll see every component that matches that. So here I've got my heroes view component, and there in line 49, you can see my data model. And then if I go into the heroes list component, you'll see down here, I've got a prop called heroes. I'm going to pass in an array of heroes to my hero list. And that's going to come from my heroes. Notice my heroes component is the parent, and it has a hero list as a child component. So I recommend and encourage you to look at this repo. Let me show you where that is. Look at the repo for this Heroes View application, and you'll see all the examples that we did today. You can run it and play with it. The README file will tell you how to get started with it. If you want to learn about all the tools, what we just saw, you can click on these links here, showing you those resources we started with again. The most important one probably here are the bottom ones. The Vue Heroes demo, which is here at heroes-view. That short link will bring you right to the GitHub repo. And then the other one is a Vue Getting Started course, which will lead you right to the Pluralsight course where you can watch much more detail about getting going with Vue. With that, I'll keep the code up. So if you have any questions about the code or Vue itself or anything we've shown in the presentation, I will now hand it off to my Pluralsight friends to curate those questions.
Awesome. So much good stuff already, John. Thank you. So before we get to questions, a quick comment from Stan that he loves the Star Wars t-shirt. So I wanted to
thank
pass
you
that
very
along.
much.
Yeah. Okay, from Walter, is Vue a framework or is it a library like React? Like, is the distinction important between those two?
So you're asking me my opinion. I don't think there is a strict what is it. If you ask the creators of these different libraries and frameworks, they'll give you different answers. I call them all web frameworks. Vue is a web framework. React is a web framework. Svelte is a web framework. So is Angular.
Okay.
You know, we could probably have a long discussion about them, but I think generally people think of React as a library or Svelte as a library because the smallest parts of them are much smaller than the others, but really they're web frameworks because they handle CSS, HTML, and JavaScript.
Okay, fair enough. We got this question in some form several different times, and I know you get this question a lot. What are the differences and advantages between Angular, Vue, and React? And if you want to you can just answer this by recommending one of your other webinars or something like that if you want to.
I think we did a webinar last year on this, if I recall, on JavaScript, choosing your JavaScript frameworks. If
I think,
not, if you Google that, you'll find a couple of videos of me at, I think it was the JS conference in Paris, France last year, when we used to actually have conferences. But in short, here, I'll give you my brief example. There's four main frameworks that I like: React, Angular, Vue, and Svelte. Svelte is great for the most simplest framework that's out there. It's one of the newest one that's out there as well. So it's not as robust yet in the ecosystem, which I think is fair, but I really love it. It's great. Vue is great if you, let me leave Vue off for a minute. I'll do it on last. Angular is great if you want something that comes with everything out of the box and you have like a guided path on how to do things. It's very opinionated. React is great if you want to be able to do all those things, but you want to have more options on how you pick and choose them. So maybe more of a, I don't really like the way that this React app is built. I'm going to do it different next time. Neither is good or bad. It's just, a different perspective. And Vue is kind of in the middle. It's not as opinionated as Angular, but it's not as freeform as React. So I'd leave it at that.
cool. And I just found a link to that webinar that you mentioned, how to choose the
Good.
right JavaScript framework. So I'll drop that in the chat
I'm glad I
momentarily.
didn't lie. That's nice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it will be a blast from the past. It's 2018 though. So,
Oh, wow.
um, all right. Craig asked two questions. Number one, should new users start with Vue 3? And number two, do you recommend using TypeScript with Vue?
Great question. So Vue 3 is in release candidate unless it's come out in the last 24 hours because I haven't been paying attention to the internet. So while it's in release candidate, would I go to production with something that was in release candidate? Personally, no. Although release candidate means it's really darn close to being done. So once it's out, yes, I would use Vue 3. The good news is everything I showed you today still works. They have a great migration guide in the docs on how to go to 2 to 3. But there's one massively really cool feature in Vue 3 besides TypeScript, which I'll get to in a minute, that I recommend. And that's something called the composition API. And we could do a whole talk on that one, and maybe we should in the future, what that is. The good news is you can use everything you learned today and still use Vue 3. The second part of that was TypeScript. Would I use TypeScript out of the box with Vue 3? I wouldn't use it with Vue 2. I've had hit or miss, quite frankly, and I love TypeScript, but I felt like in Vue 2, it didn't really work great. Vue 3 has been written from the ground up to, maybe not the ground up, but it's been written to work with TypeScript. It's been written in TypeScript, and the TypeScript support is amazing. So yes, I would, if you like TypeScript, I would absolutely recommend TypeScript for Vue 3.
Cool. Someone on YouTube asked, when you lazy load components, you assign a light loading component that shows while the main component loads. Hopefully this is all fault. You're tracking this so far. Is there a way to register that loading component globally and use it for multiple lazy load components without having to import it in every view that where I want to use it? Does that all
I
make
love
sense?
it. Does. I love
Okay.
yes or no questions because I could be a politician and go, yes, there is a way.
Okay.
Next question.
Okay.
It's actually more complicated than I think we have time here to go over, but might be good for us to do a follow-up, maybe on Twitter. If you reach out to me, I can explain more. But yes, you can have like what the person wants to do is like, while the thing's lazy loading, let's say it takes too long, or maybe a half second, you want to show something in the meantime. Could you show something that does that? Yes. And do you have to import it in every place? There's ways around it. But I haven't seen any conventional way of doing that yet. So in React, they have something called suspense, which makes that easier. In Vue, there is a new way in Vue 3 to do that as well. So check out Vue 3 for that.
Cool. If you're listening, whoever asked that question, hit up John on Twitter at John_Papa, and he'll,
Yes, not Papa John, but John
no,
underscore.
don't make that mistake. Okay, next question. Can we use Vue along with existing jQuery library?
Absolutely. You can use anything with jQuery technically. So, and there's a lot of places out there. Like I know a lot of apps that I've maintained where they were like PHP with jQuery. And I don't know PHP, but they asked us to use Vue or Angular in it. And yeah, you can load Vue apps on the same page with jQuery, if that's what you're asking.
Cool. How does the performance of Vue compare to that of Angular? What role does
Great.
the virtual DOM play?
They're all great. Honestly, I think we've gotten to a point now with Angular, React, and Vue and Svelte where the performance of these apps is really negligible, the difference between them. It's more about how you architect them. Like I can build a garbage app in any of these, and I can build a great app in any of these. And maybe garbage isn't the right word, but one that's poorly designed. You can build a very, very fast app in Vue, Angular, React, or Svelte. And I challenge anybody to tell me otherwise.
Cool. Fair enough. Another question. Can we create a custom directive in Vue?
You can create your own kinds of directives and components in Vue. So there's ways you can do that. Um, Probably a better question is what are you trying to create, and could you do that in Vue? Um, but yes, there are ways you can create your own custom aspects.
Cool. This might have been referring to like one specific part of the presentation, but Jason asked, is this better than Express.js?
Is this better than Express.js? I'm not sure what this might be.
It might,
Usually,
yeah, it might have been when you were specifically doing the demo portion. So
yeah, I probably need more details. Jason, if that's you, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. And Express is what serves the content. So Vue Express is back end and Vue is front end. So they don't compete in the same space. So if I did something that miscommunicated, please let me know and I will try to clarify that on Twitter.
cool. And with that, John, I know you have a hard stop in just a couple of minutes. So I wanted to plug one thing and then give you the chance to do kind of a final takeaway. Um, I'm going to drop a link in the chat here if you want an email reminder of upcoming Pluralsight webinars. And I can't remember if we have another one planned with you, John, but there's a good chance that you might do an upcoming webinar with Pluralsight. I'm just going to say it. So, we have lots of other great authors that help with these as well. So I'll drop a link in there if you want to sign up. And with that, John, final takeaways for today's presentation.
Yeah, I think two things. One is I believe we have a Vue Q&A type webinar coming up in a couple of months, but we can verify that. And second, give Vue a shot. It's really, really easy to get into. And I think there's a ton of material out there and some great people out there working on it. It's one of the most exciting web frameworks out there. But again, if you already know Angular or React or one of the others, there's no reason to start a new framework unless you find one like your team is using it and that's what you're going for. But it's not like anybody's telling you have to switch from one framework to the other. So don't ever feel that peer pressure. I know there's a lot of it out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone who joined us. And I'm glad I wasn't a liar. John is going to be doing another webinar in the fall. So we can look forward to that. And in the meantime, everyone have a great rest of their day.